Colombia heads to a presidential election runoff with a first-round result that, in many ways, upset the form book. The far-right candidate gate-crashing the event, bucking expectations. Aberaldo de la Espriella stands on a tough on drug cartels agenda. He's promising mega prisons to deal with the criminality, and he was posing there in a Colombian national football shirt. Ivan Cepeda is a senator and the candidate for the ruling left wing, a political ally of the current president, Gustavo Petro. Monty Francis now breaks it down for us.
Supporters of the right-wing candidate, Aberaldo de Espriella, were doing a victory dance, even though their candidate hasn't ultimately won Colombia's presidential race. De la Espriella came out slightly ahead of a left-wing candidate in Sunday's vote, which is now headed to a runoff. His supporters say it's the latest sign of a right-wing wave sweeping elections across Latin America.
We had hoped to win in the first round, but that's just the way it is. Still, we're confident that we'll win in the runoff.
De la Espriella has vowed to take on the drug traffickers in Colombia by force and to build mega prisons to hold them, drawing comparisons to El Salvador's Nayib Bukele. A political outsider, De la Espriella is flashy and bombastic, a supporter of Donald Trump who refers to himself as the Tiger.
Here's your tiger. Let him roar and bite. Thank you, Colombia. We will confront, defeat, and punish Colombia's enemies who seek to destroy our homeland.
His opponent is Ivan Cepeda, a leftist philosopher turned senator who is expected to come out on top Sunday. He took on a more somber tone in his remarks following the vote, stopping short of contesting the first-round results, but raising questions about possible irregularities.
There is a discrepancy we want to verify regarding the electoral roll, and this is not just any discrepancy. We're talking about 885,000 people or individuals.
Colombia's current president, Gustavo Petro, also raised doubts about the results, saying he would wait for judges to review them. A runoff between De la Espriella and Cepeda is set for June 21st.
Let's deepen the analysis and bring in Christopher Sabatini, Senior Research Fellow on the Americas at Chatham House. Christopher, of course, someone we turn to when we need that little extra something on a story coming out of the Americas. And with this one in Colombia, we really need some insight, Christopher. So it's very much over to you. Aberaldo de la Espriella, I admire his Colombian international football jersey. I don't know what he stands for, but he's gate-crashed the party in many ways, hasn't he?
He has. I mean, the man came from the private sector. He was a defense attorney, in some cases defending some pretty shady characters. So, you know, he's not arriving at this point without a few skeletons in his closet, but he had no party. The man just basically ran a social media campaign. He's lived a large part of his adult life outside Colombia. But, you know, it's not a coincidence that he's cut from the Trump cloth because, in fact, he actually has worked with a number of Trump campaign advisors and political analysts. He's even visited Trump in Mar-a-Lago. So this is really, again, a part of what's unfortunately called the Donroe doctrine, asserting itself in partisan politics in Latin America. Now, in this case, look, the current government, but it has committed a number of problems. De la Espriella is really tapping public concerns over crime and insecurity. For example, just in 2023, cocaine production increased by 53%. The effort by the current government, Gustavo Petro, who's of the same party of Cepeda, the Pacto Histórico, the center-left party, they attempted to negotiate a total peace, which led to a series of ceasefires. And by the way, you said this, Mark, earlier in your broadcast, redefining the idea of ceasefires here. Those never lasted. They were often violated, and often they were just with criminal groups who don't typically engage in ceasefires. So that led also to an escalation in the murder rate. It went to where it is now, about 28.5% per 28.5 people per 100,000, which is really one of the 4 times the global average for murder rates in the world. So, you know, he really hasn't delivered on a lot of these things. He's implemented some good progressive economic policies, or at least tried. But on security and crime, which is a major issue for Colombia, he hasn't delivered.
I don't know if there's any sense that the upstart, I'll call him, has any real chance of imposing what he's saying. Because I suspect that what he's saying about drug barons and what he's saying about cartels and what he's saying about building mega prisons, it's not that different from what anybody else is saying, is it?
You know, the truth is, though, I think the center left, and I say this with a certain amount of sympathy, simply has not defined itself well on the issues of security. And that is one of the #1 demands for voters across Latin America. And, you know, we had in Mexico the hugs versus bullets, it rhymes better in Spanish, policy of AMLO, the previous president of Mexico. You know, in the case of Brazil, Lula has spoken out about particularly aggressive police tactics that have led to the loss of civilian lives. But those were, the public reaction against his criticism was largely negative. So, you know, there really hasn't been a good response from the left. And basically, people like De La Espriella are really tapping into this. And they're doing this, as your report said, in part by citing really what is, but if you just measure it in terms of security, not human rights, a hugely successful example. El Salvador has gone from one of the highest rates of murder rates in the world to one of the lowest in Latin America. And that's significant. But it's come at the cost of human rights. And De La Espriella, he's arguing that he in fact is implying that he would work with the Trump administration to use drones and missiles to attack criminal groups in Colombia. He's talking again about building these prisons. That's probably will work. And he's also engaged in a very anti-woke agenda. And while the first two things, security, obviously important, economic growth and insecurity, as well as inequality in Latin America, anti-wokeism is not going to solve the problems that Latin Americans confront. But again, he's tapped into this anger, and it's serving him well right now. We'll see how he does. I think this is now, as we pass into the second round, this could be, it is his election to lose.
Indeed, he's leading. The third place candidate, as I understand it, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, the third place candidate has dropped out, as she has to, and she's given her backing to De La Espriella. So I take it this is very much a push towards more people getting behind him and actually sort of lending more votes to him and him actually winning.
And exactly, here's the problem. You're right. It's first of all Cepeda, the center-left candidate. The center-left had consolidated, whereas the center-right to the extreme right was running a number of candidates. So basically, there's nowhere else for Cepeda to go. He's reached the ceiling, I think, in large part also because there is, while the current government, his party's government, remains stable and somewhat popular, there's a lot of rejection of that party. So he really was in a difficult position as an incumbent. And then again, on the right, you have 3 or 4 parties that if you just add them up, it pushes De La Espriella well over the 50% mark he has to get to win the second round.
Okay, so let's imagine that he gets what he's looking for and gets into power. And of course, the agenda changes then, because you can be outside power shouting the odds, but then once you get into power, you need to govern, you need to rule, you need to put into effect what you've been talking about. And clearly, you've mentioned that the production of cocaine has gone up. Clearly, there are criminal enterprises involved in that. I know one says that the FARC rebels were calmed, but clearly there are still elements that are living by their own agenda in certain parts of the country and organising criminal activities. Where does that go? How does that change? Does that sort of basically boil up into like a massive boil that one day is lanced and who knows how many people will get hurt?
The boil analogy is pretty good. I mean, the truth is as you say, there are huge ungoverned spaces in Colombia. So basically, you can take out all of the security elements. You can wipe out gang leaders. You can bomb them into, I guess, submission. But you still have to take over that territory. And that territory is territory, in many cases, that has been deeply embedded in illicit activity, not just cocaine trafficking, but also illegal mining, which, by the way, in Latin America right now, illegal gold mining earns more profits for criminal groups than cocaine does. It's going to be difficult to roust these groups. Yes, you can engage in what U.S. Defense Secretary Peter Hesketh calls kinetic actions, but that's just taking out the capos. It's not actually doing anything. And so what we don't hear from De La Espriella is a more consistent effort, and this is particularly true for Colombia in these rural areas where many campesinos don't really have the means to connect themselves to a national economy, to produce for the legal economy. It's going to take a real state effort to, in fact, build state capacity in these areas. And that's not De La Esprilla's, first of all, it's not his agenda, but I also don't think he has the patience to do that. There is in his rhetoric a certain amount of anti-government, anti-state tone that I think, much like Donald Trump in many ways, basically eliminates the sorts of follow-up measures and commitments that need to be done.
Christopher, we could talk forever, but thank you very much indeed. We've run out of time. There will be another chance, of course, come election night, and I know if you can, you will join us, sir. Thank you very much indeed, Christopher Sabatini of Chatham House. Expert, as we heard, on all matters Latin America, and clearly giving us everything he has on the situation in Colombia. We're down to the last two, Aberaldo de la Espriella and Ivan Cepeda will be battling it out throughout this week, of course, to the final vote off, and of course we will take you through that every step of the way. And thanks again to Christopher Sabatini.